This is a great crowd. I think we are ready to start. Do I get thumbs up from Jeanette? Okay, good morning and happy leap year day. The orbital debris rules still apply, even in a leap year. Thank you for joining our third Space Bureau open house as part of our transparency initiative. In addition to our talented FCC team, we are thrilled to welcome celebrated guest speakers today as we commemorate 20 years of orbital debris mitigation rules at the FCC. The FCC's rules concerning for satellite licensing have included requirements concerning orbital debris mitigation since 2004, and they apply to all FCC satellite licensing, experimental, commercial, and amateur, including requests to access the U.S. market using non-U.S. licensed satellites. The new space age is growing at such a rapid pace with innovative new services constantly being developed. It's our job as regulators to enable rapid growth with rules and processes that support the commercial space age. We'll hear today from our illustrious speakers about how orbital debris mitigation rules are one part of the overall whole of government effort to keep space sustainable. Thank you to Charity Whedon from NASA, Gabriel Sweeney, the Office of Space Commerce, NOAA, and Dr. Scott Pace, the Space Policy Institute, for their great leadership and for joining us today. We'll hear remarks from them shortly. And finally, thanks to the Space Bureau team for their ongoing deep commitment to space sustainability issues. Many are over here. And special thanks to Jeanette Kennedy and Whitney Lohmeyer, who are leading our transparency initiative. And now I'm delighted to turn it over to Carl Kensinger, Special Counsel in the Space Bureau and the OG of space sustainability and orbital debris. Carl.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us at today's open house. I'd like to, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, recount a little bit from a personal perspective my views of what happened with the FCC's involvement in orbital debris mitigation. And so that was, for me, a journey that began right after I joined the International Bureau in 1994, and I was assigned to work on the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy's interagency report on orbital debris. So that was a report prepared during 94, 95 and released in 95. As I later learned, this was not the first government report on orbital debris. The FAA had covered the topic as a part of their hazard analysis of commercial space transportation in 1988. The National Security Council issued a report on orbital debris in 1989, and actually my first boss in the International Bureau, Thomas Tisch, participated in that effort. And that report actually included a brief discussion of the FCC's regulatory role. That was followed by another a fairly important paper, the 1990 background paper prepared by Congress's Office of Technology Assessment that was on orbiting debris, a space environmental problem. And it also discussed the potential nexus between FCC licensing and debris control and prevention. And actually one of our panelists today, Dr. Pace, was acknowledged in that report as a contributor. In 1995, when I had first read this draft OSTP report, a report that was essentially complete when I was assigned to the project, I was then a newly minted expert and FCC point of contact on orbital debris. And with that actually came the privilege of working with some real experts, NASA's Joe Loftus, George Levin, Nick Johnson, just to name a few, people who were extraordinarily competent and extremely generous with their we're developing NASA standards. Those in turn formed the core of the U.S. government orbital debris mitigation guidelines of 2001, published in 2001. And throughout that time, there was ongoing work with interagency colleagues, spearheaded by many of those same individuals to press for improvements in debris mitigation practices. And so I think one of the things that was recognized early on was that adherence to guidelines by the commercial sector would be critical. If the U.S. government systems were the only ones adhering to guidelines, the effort would be in vain. And so that was something that our NASA colleagues in particular, but across the U.S. government, were fairly regularly reminding this young staffer at the FCC about. So in 1997, when I was tasked with preparing a memo and a work plan for debris mitigation issues, we did have a handful of cases where debris mitigation had become an issue, about 4 to be exact. And it was also clear that the issue was not going to go away, particularly with multiple low Earth orbit constellations in development at that time. So we adopted a first set of rules here at the FCC for the 2 gigahertz KU band and KA band LEO systems in 2000, 2002, and 2003, respectively, before adopting the comprehensive set of regulations covering services and frequency bands, all services and frequency bands in 2004. So just note, one of the important features, it's already been noted, but one of the important features of that rule is that, and something that continues today, is that the rule does apply to both U.S. licensed satellites and to non-U.S. licensed systems seeking U.S. market access. There was a concern at the time and continuing today about a level playing field with respect to non-U.S. licensed systems. The international dimensions of debris mitigation were also a key element of the work in that period. In 1995, again going back to 1995, work was already underway with the Interagency Debris Coordination Committee, the NASA-led effort of space agencies internationally. The effort there was to, at the time, primarily to address a concern about the fragmentation of launch vehicle upper stages, but the work then became a vehicle for internationalizing debris mitigation guidelines. And there was also a parallel work stream within the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And there was a technical report that resulted from that work stream in 1999. The IADC presented guidelines it had developed to the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in 2003. And the COPUOS ultimately endorsed a set of guidelines in 2007. So a model that emerged during that period, and I think really continues today, is one of high-level international guidelines, not binding as treaties, but implemented through national measures such as the NASA standards that are applied to its programs, or the regulations like the FCC's that are applied to commercial activities. Our regulations at the FCC were among the first to cover the commercial sector, although we have seen some countries now follow with additional regulations. I think quite a few things have changed since 2004. Now, to bring the time machine forward a little bit, the first, I'd say, significant development in 2010 was when the Department of Defense first began to make conjunction data messages much more routinely available. There have been, since that time, steady improvements in the distribution and processing of space situational awareness data and predictions, so a very significant one. We'll talk about that a little bit more with our speaker from the Commerce Department later. We've seen the widespread adoption of small satellites for commercial and research purposes, and for me, a watershed moment in that development was when, in a 3-month period at the end of 2013, the beginning of 2014, there were more small satellites launched 100, more than the entire number of satellites in the Iridium constellation, which at the time was the largest of the low Earth orbiting constellations, and it had been for some years. And so, 100 doesn't sound that much today. I think it was impressive at the time, but the 3 months total, just note, has been since eclipsed by a single launch on a single day with 143 satellites. So we're definitely seeing a scaling up. The satellites in that 3-month period included some for a small satellite remote sensing constellation, and I think that is a third development worth noting. It's the deployment of larger satellite constellations. It's been an increasing feature of commercial remote sensing and communications, and obviously with that has the scale of satellite deployments has increased by orders of magnitude from where it was just 20 years ago. And finally, the last development I'd note, again bringing us a bit closer to the future, is that we have seen some successful commercial satellite servicing missions, which significant development and a real growth in interest in making servicing a regular feature of space operations. So I think those developments have really triggered work by the U.S. government and the FCC, and the first I'd mention would be the revisions to the U.S. government orbital debris mitigation standard practices. This is a process that was shepherded by NASA and its chief scientist for orbital debris, J.C. Liu, and completed in 2019. 2019 was also an important year internationally. It marked the adoption of the guidelines on long-term sustainability of outer space activities by the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Now, those guidelines include a guideline that encourages implementing the UN 2007 debris mitigation guidelines, but also has a much broader scope that encompasses other aspects of responsible space operations, including coordination among operators. So at the FCC, we've worked to address these developments over the years, and we had a comprehensive update of our rules in 2020. That update incorporated into the FCC rules the updates from the 2019 revisions to the U.S. government orbital debris mitigation standard practices. We've also adopted in 2020 rule changes to address the surge in the number of new space ventures and the need to ensure that those ventures work with available space surveillance, space object cataloging, and operator coordination processes to facilitate safe operations, And more recently, we've shortened the period that the LEO satellites we authorize can remain in orbit following completion of their missions, moving from 25 years to 5 years. So those are recent developments, and that brings us to today, the Transparency Initiative. Just note that the goal of this initiative is to make materials available to assist license applicants in addressing the Commission's rules. And I thank you all for climbing into the time machine with me and taking the trip, coming back to the present. And I'd like to go ahead then and invite colleagues from the FCC to come to the table and talk a little bit about the Transparency Initiative and some of the details of the FCC licensing process, and perhaps some practical advice for participants in that process as well. So while people are getting set, I'll just welcome you to visit the Space Bureau's Transparency Initiative website. We have guidance documents there for a wide range of topics, licensing topics, but now including documents concerning orbital debris. And I'll just remind, the FCC rules do apply to all applicants, and that includes both U.S. applicants for U.S. licenses and those that are non-U.S. licensed systems but seeking U.S. market access. And the other thing I'd recommend is that sometimes the rules are treated as something to kind of address at the end of, or right at the application stage, preparing documents after a mission has been pretty well set. And I would encourage, particularly because some of the rules go to design aspects, that they're something that should be considered very much at the early stages of system development. So with that, let me maybe get started with some questions for our panelists. Steve Duell was our Associate Chief in the Space Bureau. And actually, Steve was an author of the 2004 Report and Order. The author, I should say. Right, yeah, exactly. And so, Steve, I just ask if you could, you have a bit longer view on those rules, if you could share some observations from the last 20 years. Any observations? Any observations? It's a softball.
So when someone says you have a longer view, it means you're old. So, but I'll take that. Yeah, wow, 20 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long. When I think back at the time when you and I were working on that, and so many other people at the commission, I think the first thing that strikes me when I think about it is how focused we were on geostationary satellites at the time. I mean, that really was, in the early 2000s, that was the predominant use for communication satellites. And so much of the order was addressing, the orbital debris mitigation involved with those geostationary satellites. There weren't really, at that time, there were, of course, NGSO satellite systems, Iridium, Globalstar, but it really wasn't what we're seeing, today. And so much, I remember we were looking at the GSO world. And at the time, it was, this was all new stuff. And I think, the other observation I would have is sort of how well it went. We had the rules in effect, they came into effect, and industry continued to, there was no problem. They adjusted to the rules, they embraced the rules, and we really didn't have any kind of hiccups after the rules went into effect. I mean, there were things that were, sort of tweaked along the way, but overall the framework worked very well, and I think I'm impressed with what a success it was. I think the other things that I remember the discussions at the time, and you mentioned it earlier in your presentation, is that they apply to market access applicant petitioners as well as FCC licensed satellites, and I think that was a good decision, and one that also it went fairly seamlessly. So yeah. Speak up or speak in the microphone? Speak louder. Okay. That's normally not a problem I have, but I will certainly do that. Yeah. So market access grants, applying the orbital debris mitigation, rules to both U.S. licensed satellites and petition for market access, I think, was something that was a lot of discussion about leading up to the order, but I think it was the right decision, and one that was turned out not to be a huge issue in the end. And then I guess lastly, I remember there was a lot of discussion at the time about whether or not this information on orbital debris mitigation plan should be open to the public, or whether this was something that should be done confidential, under confidential treatment and not open to the public. And I think, to the credit, the FCC followed its existing rules and policies of keeping information open and transparent, and having that information out there, I think, made it easier for other companies and new entrants to sort of see what was being done in the realm of debris mitigation, and I think was a positive development. So I would say those are the sort of the big picture thoughts I have when you look back on, where we were then and sort of where we are now.
Thanks. Sankar, maybe turning to you, you also were involved in the 2004 order and have been reviewing orbital debris mitigation plans for some time. Could you maybe talk us through what some of the areas are in the orbital debris review process that you've noticed where they may be overlooked or where there's missing information? Some tips for applicants.
Thank you, Carl. 20 years, yeah. 2004, I remember that. So yeah, with respect to the applications that we have been seeing lately, and it more so do with the NGSO, especially the small sat and experimental applications. What we have noticed, they tend to use the NASA ODAR format, which is not, I mean, it's okay. However, there's a few additional elements that our rules include that are not covered by that format. And a lot of times we have to go back and try to get additional information in the form of a letter request for those additional information. And some of those additional information include, for example, how the satellite will be tracked. A lot of times, our rules require them to disclose whether it will be an active mechanism or passive by which a satellite will be tracked. A lot of times, the application will, overlook that or not mention that at all. So that's one area. Also, with respect to in-orbit conjunction warning, in-orbit situational awareness, what happens if you do receive a conjunction warning, what's the steps you will take, what are the procedures you have in place? And a lot of times the application will not focus much on that information, but rather said, something along the line, well, we are taking this issue seriously and we will monitor it. No, but for us, we want to see something more concrete, a more precise plan, what's in place in terms, okay, if you do receive a conjunction warning, what are the steps involved? Are you going to reach out to the other satellite operators? If it's a satellite, that's the case for the warning. Also, are you going to share your ephemeris data, your launch information, and that kind of information data to the 18 Squadron or successor entity as to how you plan to manage situational awareness in space? So that's one area also where we have been seeing not a lot of information being provided, and so we have to go back. Another area that we have noticed also has to do with end-of-life disposal for these small sats. A lot of times there are debris that have survived reentry. And the application will tell us, okay, we did the casualty risk assessment and the value meets everything. And a lot of times with the ODAR, from the NASA ODAR, they will provide the type of elements that are surviving reentry, the kinetic energy of those fragments coming in, and those are all good. We need those information. In addition, the rules require that to disclose or at least inform us of what measures you're taking to design your satellite for demise. Because for us, having everything burn up is what we wanted. And so a lot of times you have to go back and try to get that kind of information, whether those design for demise was taken into consideration and what steps, not particular for that satellite at that time, but future satellites coming on board, so we have some idea of what to expect for new satellites or additional satellites in that constellation with respect to surviving debris. So those are basically the typical items that we have seen so far where we have to go back and ask for more information.
Yeah, there's some materials on the
Yes.
some materials now on the website that also can go through that in a bit more detail
Yes.
and provide pointers for how to address it, right?
Absolutely. The Transparency Initiative link on the Space Bureau website has a lot of information. It will tell you precisely what needs to be submitted and to what level of details we are looking for. In addition, there's a ton of resource, I would say. I would advise, if you're filling out an application, take a look at it. Spend a few minutes, go to the Transparency Initiative website, and follow what's there. And also, if there's a rule that is not so clear, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you through to understand those rules and what it is you need to submit to us.
So
yeah.
can I ask you any specific, particularly with respect to university or types of missions, amateur missions, any advice specifically targeted for them, in addition to what you've already said?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you, Carl. For the universities, well, a lot of these universities' missions are the grad students or the undergrad students are the ones who are actually doing a lot of the work in terms of filing the application and all that stuff. The message basically to them would be, think about the orbital debris and orbital debris mitigation from the inception, during the planning stage of the satellite or the mission, during design, implementation, when you select the material types that you're going to use for your components and the placement of those materials within the satellites. Those are all should be, think about the orbital debris mitigation aspect as you do all those phases. Shouldn't wait at the end of the, once you have all that, to put together the orbital debris report. I think by then you're a little bit too late. In case you run into issue, for example, you have surviving fragments, then it's a bit too late to go back to the drawing board and modify some of those components or stuff like that. So my advice to them is, one, think about the orbital debris mitigation and the FCC rules from the inception, during the planning phase, design phase. And if you do that, at the end, I think everything will work out fairly good for you. You'll able to launch your satellites, and I don't think you'll have much issue with us in terms of surviving fragments and that kind of stuff. So that's one. Two, look at some of the applications that have been granted already with respect to the kind of information we're looking for and the level of details that has been provided in those applications. It certainly gives you a good way to understand what it is we're looking for. Also, again, the Transparency Initiative website. Use it. There's a lot of good information there, and it will help you to help in guiding you in the kind of information you need to provide us for the orbital debris.
Yeah, I just mentioned that NASA has some programs as well that support university missions in different ways, and making use of those is very helpful and can simplify the process as well. And we definitely benefit from those programs. All right, so maybe Marissa, if I could ask you to talk about how the review of orbital debris mitigation plans fits into the broader application review process, and the things that you're commonly looking for in that process, common pitfalls or red flags or errors or whatever, how to avoid them.
Thanks. Sure, thanks. So I focus mostly on the Part 25 or commercial applications and working through that review process with the teams, both on the legal side and on the engineering side as well. And so just talking a little bit about how orbital debris mitigation fits into the broader review of the application, which involves other aspects, obviously. It really occurs throughout our application review process at the staff level. So from the beginning, as we're reviewing the applications that come in and we're looking at whether those applications are acceptable for filing, one of the things we're looking for is, has the applicant provided some of the information that's required under our rules with respect to orbital debris mitigation? So is that information there? Have they been responsive in kind of some of the key points? And then that once it's determined that the application is acceptable for filing, the review continues on the orbital debris mitigation plan. Staff are doing a little bit more in-depth review at that stage. We may have some discussion with the applicants if there are questions that come up, or areas where we need some more detailed information in a particular issue. And that can happen informally, in some cases, more formally. In some cases, we'll send a letter out that has some questions to make sure that the additional information regarding the orbital debris plan is in the record. And I think that's useful to have the information, as Steve mentioned, that is publicly available. And I think that it provides a place where other applicants can understand what's been provided in other cases. So I think that's a good feature of our rules and our process. But just generally speaking, the review process for orbital debris mitigation plans really runs in parallel with our review of all other aspects of the application. And at the grant stage, I think if you look at some of the licenses and the license conditions, you'll see orbital debris mitigation related conditions that come into play in some cases alongside other conditions related to spectrum use, so really throughout the process.
Okay, great. So Marissa, you have been, and by the way, I should have mentioned this at the very beginning. We're actually the author for one of our more recent orders, and are also one of the folks who helped support the interagency work on debris mitigation. I'd be interested, from that experience, where do you think the U.S. is right now with respect to other countries in addressing orbital debris mitigation issues?
Sure. And I think just to maybe start with the answer, I'll echo what's come up a few different times here, which is that we do in the U.S. review, or the FCC review, the orbital debris mitigation plans of the non-U.S. Satellites that are seeking access to the U.S. market. So really for all the applicants, orbital debris mitigation plans that come to us are subject to the rigorous review to help ensure space safety. And I think this is beneficial because the U.S. has really advanced a number of areas regarding orbital debris mitigation and is really one of the leading fora internationally addressing these issues, particularly when it comes to commercial operations.
Okay, great. Steve, I guess maybe we're close to the end of the questions I have, but I'm gonna give you the last one. And you're now working on the Commission's ISAM proceeding, in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, with the NPRM that was just adopted. Could you? And I just note the S portion of that, the servicing portion, is kind of interesting for the general topic today because it does hold out the prospect potentially for debris remediation. So something that changes the situation in space by being able to remove other objects. So I'm curious, could you perhaps just outline what the rule changes are that the Commission is considering in the NPRM and
So first of all, let me try and redeem myself on the volume. Hopefully this is better. Yes, the ISAM NPRM was really an attempt to establish a framework for licensing satellites that don't fit neatly into our existing rules for licensing RF communications. Like, as you mentioned, the servicing mission is going to have a very different spectrum usage than our traditional communication satellites that are engaged in, moving data or messages point to point, point to multi-point, or doing video delivery. So, the NPRM proposes to exempt those stations from some of our rules that are designed to address RF interference concerns, the ability to share spectrum, or to avoid spectrum warehousing. Mainly those would be our processing round rules for NGSO satellites and the requirements for first come, first serve for GSO, as well as granting a grace period, so to speak, for the filing of surety bonds to avoid spectrum warehousing. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's the path we took for the small satellites a few years ago, and we think that was successful. But as you mentioned, it's an NPRM, so we're seeking comment, and I hope to get that into the Federal Register soon and hear what the public has to say about that.
Okay, so a real focus there on radio frequency licensing processes and trying to enable some of these broader activities. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Great. So with that, I think we'll conclude this panel and ask Jennifer to come up and moderate the next panel if we could.
Thank you. Good morning. So far this morning, we've had a retrospective look at the FCC's engagement in orbital debris mitigation, and a discussion on current FCC rules and policies. Now we'll conclude the morning with a session on the future of space sustainability. We're honored to be here with our colleagues from NASA, NOAA, and the Space Policy Institute to join us this morning for this discussion. So I think first we'll have each of our panelists offer some brief opening remarks, and then we'll get into some questions. I think we'll start with Charity Whedon, Associate Administrator, Office of Technology Policy and Science at NASA. Thanks, Charity.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I was not in government service 20 years ago, I can tell you that. However, nearly 20 years ago, I was inside of Cheyenne Mountain, and close to that, the first Chinese ASAT test happened. And a couple years later, of course, Iridium Cosmos occurred. And so space sustainability and making sure our orbital environment is healthy and usable for future generations has been a theme throughout my career. So I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Other important kind of significant milestones in the last 20 years, seeing the growth of the low Earth orbiting constellations and the number of satellites and the growth of the industry writ large has been a positive benefit for society. We're getting so much more data. We're getting access to communications like never before. We're getting to do more science and exploration, and we're making sure our national security needs are being met. But with big roles like that, it comes big responsibility to ensure that the orbital environment stays safe and sustainable. So I also recognize all the leaders of this topic that have come before us, obviously on this panel, many of them as well. And we surely stand on the shoulders of giants, but we are also looking at needing to scale up and do more. And we're at a very pivotal period of our development in space to make sure we do this properly. So I think I'll just pause there, but just looking at say around the 2017 timeframe when the application process for large constellations started come, and how I just recognize FCC for the past 2 decades of thinking forward and making sure that the low Earth orbiting constellations were also thought of in terms of debris mitigation as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Charity. Now I think we'll move on to Dr. Scott Pace, Director, Space Policy Institute. Thanks.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today, and your new building is definitely an improvement over the old one. This is terrific. So thank you. Taking a bit from Carl's point about the Wayback Machine, I kind of came into an awareness of some of this stuff in sort of the first .com boom in the late 90s. So Carl attributes maybe some of my involvement with the OTA report in 1990. There I was really thinking more about launch systems and per se, and orbital debris was a consideration, but it was almost kind of theoretical. It starts becoming much more real as the first mega constellations of the day, Iridium, Global Star, somebody might remember Teledesic and things like that. You start realizing how that environment was changing. And all of that, of course, was before the FCC had an involvement in 2003, 2004 in orbital debris. Now, everybody kind of has their own, shall we say, lived experience of it. I actually remember, and of course, working with Tom Tisch back in the day, and the FCC was not exactly chomping at the bit to get into this. They were willing. They were wanting to be good teammates. They worried about sort of the industry and so forth. But it was something where I think they had to think very carefully and very hard about this as a new area. And I think at the time, at least my own perception from the rest of the interagency was the FCC was really doing us a favor by taking some of this on because they had the skills and smart technical people and regulatory process and so forth to do that. And I think that's largely worked. What you're seeing now is with the new generation of mega constellations is that many, many more regulatory entities around the world are having to grapple with issues that the FCC grappled with, I think, a long time ago, and still struggles with. In the old days, heads of space agencies usually started off as grad students working on Landsat data. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot of new regulatory and a lot of space agencies coming out of ministries of telecom, because that's where the social benefits are coming from, that's where the space applications are coming from, and yet there is a thinness often to their capacity in these areas. And so the role of the FCC and, frankly, of U.S. leadership in general with NASA, DOD, and Commerce is even more important, because I don't think we're going to see some brand new treaty regulating space, much the way maybe some people hope. And so there's not going to be a way to sort of outsource how we deal with all these problems to some other entity, UN or otherwise. And so therefore it's going to be the capacity building among other sovereign states, hopefully looking to and partnering with the United States and its regulatory apparatus in terms of shaping that future world. So the discussions that you're holding now, this transparency initiative and so forth, are not only important, of course, for the United States, but important to how we engage really with the rest of the world in shaping future of U.S. leadership in this area. Over.
Great, thank you. And I actually do remember Teledesic. I'm looking at Jennifer Manor, and I think I saw Suzanne somewhere, Suzanne Malloy. So yeah, I'm dating myself, but that was one
and
of
buying out
important
every
ones.
pizza parlor in Geneva to keep people in
Oh.
that night. Okay. Oh, trade secrets? Sorry.
Anyway, thank you. Okay, next we'll move on to Gabriel Sweeney, Director of Policy Advocacy, International Division, Office of Space Commerce at NOAA. Thanks.
Thanks, and thanks to Carl and Julie and you, Jennifer, and the whole FCC Space Bureau for hosting this, and more generally, thank you all for carrying the torch of sustainability and debris mitigation and end-of-life requirements for so long for the U.S. government regulatory system. There was a gap, and it's very good that FCC was in a position to fill it. Office of Space Commerce has been around a while, but our mission, until pretty recently, was quite narrow. Most of you know that the part of this office that I now lead, the advocacy office, really was all the Office of Space Commerce did for the first many, many years of its mission. And we still do that mission, listening to industry, working with inside the U.S. government to advocate on behalf of pro-commercial policies within the U.S. interest. And one thing we're definitely hearing as part of that mission is that industry, although certainly they prefer, in general terms, fewer regulations than more, they are very concerned about sustainability. Industry does not benefit if the space environment is difficult to access or unsafe to operate in. So, although yes, industry certainly tells us many concerns about rules and regulations, they also are very concerned that the space environment still be a place where the U.S. private sector can succeed as they have done for so long. So we're definitely hearing that in my division, and that sort of slice of what OSC does clearly has a sustainability focus, I would say. Sustainability in debris, but I would say I'm going to mostly talk about sustainability, because when we talk sustainability, we don't just mean debris. It also means things like end of life. It means things like congestion and an entire suite of considerations. It is also a big part of the other two missions for the office. In addition to our advocacy role, as you all know, we have been tasked with taking on the public-facing, let's say, part of space situational awareness in SPD3 in the previous administration, and transitioning on into this administration, we have consistency. That mission is absolutely core to sustainability. If you don't know what's there, if operators don't know what's in outer space, it's obviously very difficult to have a sustainable and safe space environment. So I'm happy to talk in more detail in the future about what this looks like. You all know it's called TRAX. That's going to be our new public-facing SSA system. That transition is ongoing. And, it's not a regulatory system, but it is the backbone, let's say, for how you would actually implement or manage or verify a lot of the sustainability measures. Particularly with regards to the private sector, who often don't have access, of course, to their own space situational awareness, who will be relying, at least for basic services, on TRAX. So, sustainability is really the let's say, the motivation for almost all of that work. And then finally, of course, OSC fairly recently incorporated the NOAA Space Regulatory Wing, CRISRA, that regulates remote sensing. Systems that have the ability to image the Earth require a remote sensing license from CRISRA, and CRISRA now is part of the Office of Space Commerce. Until recently, CRISRA has deferred to other sustainability regulators. Right? So, for example, if a U.S. company got an FCC license, then CRISRA did not, of course, impose additional or different or duplicative requirements on things like debris or sustainability. We're realizing, though, increasingly that there are situations where actors don't get an FCC license or don't get another U.S. government space operations license of some kind. So we have U.S. companies who may only get a remote sensing license in terms of what the U.S. government licensing that they get. So we are in the process of drafting a notice, and I'll just tell you all, keep your eyes on the Federal Register in the next, hopefully, day or two, any minute now. We're going to be putting out a request for comment, asking whether and how, if yes, CRISRA should implement some sustainability relevant debris and end-of-life rules for U.S. systems that do not get other licenses, so don't get an FCC license, for example, to gap fill, so that there aren't companies that are able to, let's say, jurisdiction shop and avoid, in the end, any sustainability requirements. So keep your eyes on that. The last thing I'll say is that although we are currently the regulator of remote sensing, as you all know very well, there are proposals from the White House, and Congress is considering the White House proposal as well as its own in order to expand how the U.S. regulatory system manages what some people call novel space activities, right? All these things that we've talked about all morning that don't fit into those neat categories of the past, which is mostly remote sensing and telecommunications. And as Congress considers that, it's going to be really critical to think through what authorities those regulators, or the U.S. regulatory system in general, is asked to implement, and what factors they're able to take into account. As I said at the beginning, industry is concerned about sustainability, operators and government are concerned about sustainability, so I think there's a very good chance that if Congress does do something in this space, regulators are going to be tasked explicitly with taking sustainability into account. And some of those proposals, most of them point, at least in part, to the Office of Space Commerce to expand that regulatory role for some of these novel space activities. So obviously that depends on what Congress does, but we are looking to the future and already thinking through how we would take sustainability, debris mitigation, end of life things into account if we were tasked with an expanded regulatory role. So I'll stop there, but happy to talk about any of those things more.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Carl, did you want to, or we can just move to questions? We've heard a lot from you.
I've already said quite a lot, so
Okay, yeah.
probably no
Yeah, no
need to-
offense.
We can jump into hearing from our
I
other
think
panelists. I think.
we'll go ahead and jump into some questions and more discussion. Charity, I just wanted to get a little sense. NASA has played a pivotal role in developing orbital debris mitigation guidelines and best practices for space operations. How satisfied are you with worldwide adoption, and where do we need to do more work?
Great. Well, first, it's really good to see global attention to the issue, first and foremost. And next, that there has been a lot of work done with the help of the interagency and NASA to further best practices and guidelines. Now, can that keep up with the scale of the issue and the pace of operations in orbit? I think we need to think about that. We need to think about the implementation piece now that we have these guidelines globally, and compliance, right? Compliance of current rules, but also moving forward in a path to update rules as well. We also need to be nimble, right? We need to have a flexible system to make sure all operators can thrive in orbit. And NASA's role here is to help develop and support the technologies that can further space sustainability and adhere to the guidelines. Tracking and modeling is also another element of NASA technical expertise that can feed into best practices and implementation. But importantly, so is coordination with the international community. So NASA does get involved with the UN COPIUS, so the Long-Term Sustainability Working Group. And so there's a lot of opportunity there for NASA to bring the world together with our interagency colleagues and further these guidelines and support their implementation. So as we have growth in the orbital environment, lots of benefits, but also there's putting an urgency onto the situation. So we need to implement the current guidelines, but then go farther and then commit to going farther as well.
Thank you. Carl, I'm going to jump to you for a second. What do you consider the most significant outcomes from the FCC's activities with respect to orbital debris mitigation? What changes have you seen in these issues? How these issues have been approached?
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you. So I think, first of all, in the 20 years since the regulations were adopted, there has been several fairly fundamental shifts in the way people view those issues and how they approach them, and particularly how commercial entities address them. I think it obviously not something that's solely attributable to the FCC rules. It's a kind of a larger change in the thinking about orbital debris mitigation. And a lot of what we have done is derivative of the work of NASA and other government agencies. But I do think the rules provided a push in a positive direction, raised the level of discussion about these issues. And so as part of a broader U.S. effort, I think it also set an example that has resulted in improved attention to debris mitigation globally. So it's improved outcomes. And I'd just note a couple of things. I think Steve mentioned this, but end-of-life disposal for geostationary spacecraft. The past 2 decades, we've seen significant improvements in the practices that are followed. Most satellites now are being removed from the GSO arc at the end of their mission, and if they aren't, it's because there was an attempt, but a technical issue that prevented it. I think we're also seeing that operators have taken some really extraordinary efforts at the end of life, despite unanticipated technical issues with their satellites. And I think, 20, 25 years ago, kind of if it got too difficult, abandonment in place was perhaps considered more of a live option than it is today. So I also say for GSOs, the satellite design and operations are now much better aligned with the goal of leaving satellites passivated so they don't have extra fuel and so on. And then for non-geostationary spacecraft, it was still relatively common 20, 25 years ago to consider deploying a satellite with no propulsion into a low Earth orbit where that would remain for 25 years or perhaps even centuries. That really today is, I think, for almost everyone not considered an option. It's just not in the cards. And so, again, we were an early adopter of the 25-year rule at the FCC, at least in a global context. And I think as a part of a much larger set of actions, it really has been a contributor to improve compliance with that guideline, although still work to be done there globally. I think also our more recent action to move to the shorter post-mission disposal period does set a new benchmark for commercial operations, and I think it's also indicative of some even more significant shifts in thinking about end-of-life disposal globally. And I'd say there that very interesting work that's being done by our European colleagues who are now thinking very seriously and systematically about what it takes to get to a zero debris future, where I guess it's what a NASA scientist described to me in my early years of working on this as the backpacker approach, where you pack in and pack out and leave nothing behind.
Thanks. And Dr. Pace, how does academia perceive U.S. government guidelines and the ability to create a sustainable space environment? The U.S. and some other countries have made progress in incorporating guidelines into national regulations. Is enough being done both here and abroad? Would you care to comment?
Well, if there's a diversity of viewpoints within industry and government about orbital debris mitigation, you can just imagine what it's like in academia. So there is no coherent picture from academia. It's part of its charm. I think from wearing, though, an academic kind of hat, orbital debris is interesting for, I think, a variety of intellectual reasons. One, it's an issue of, well, how do we operate in a regime that's beyond traditional sovereignty? We don't own and control space, either practically or from international legal standpoint, yet we're vitally dependent upon it. So how do states interact with each other in a regime that is not subject to traditional sovereignty, the way you can say control whether a radio station in a particular U.S. state would operate? You're in a totally different sort of environment. There's also questions about sort of the economics of it. Classic problems of, tragedy of the commons, kind of issue. I should say, for the record, space is not a global commons. Everybody knows that from me. Pet rock, sorry. But that there is this issue of externalities that are imposed upon people by our space activities, and how do you get people to voluntarily, cooperate and bring that together? And there are plenty of examples in other environmental areas where people do cooperate. So I think academics find that kind of interesting. From a policy or legal standpoint, I think there are some really interesting issues, not so theoretical. Somebody made a bet with me of how long could I go without saying the word Chevron deference, but they lost. But the point is the role of what can go. So Gabriel's point about talking about what Congress and thinking about what they're going to do, this is really integral to say what are the regulatory authorities that either can come from existing authorities or which are created or Congress will have to decide on. So that's certainly a domestic legal issue. Then there is the a sort of larger question of how do we engage in the international community with these things. And I think space sustainability and orbital debris mitigation in particular has been remarkably successful in the international community, despite given various problems. Because what's been allowed to happen is a bottom-up approach of technical best practices coming out of NASA, for example, bringing those into multilateral community in COPUS, having people understand kind of what that means, stopping at the point of having any sort of binding treaties or legally binding agreements, but then bringing those back to national law and regulation so that we impose regulatory constraints with sovereign authorities, hence the FCC, but we do it in such a way that we're inclusive of the international community and that they can talk about these issues. One of the consequences of that, and again, from a kind of a global governance standpoint, is this places, I think, a important premium, not only on operator-to-operator kind of coordination, but also regulator-to-regulator coordination. So some of the bigger issues, not quite orbital debris, but close, like dark and quiet skies. You know, there are discussions of that at the UN, but you know, my personal opinion that I've said is that really the conversations between the FCC, British regulators, Ofcom, and eventually with Chinese regulators are really going to be the most important places for discussion. We can do multilateral understandings of this. We can be technically and scientifically informed, but in the end, it's going to be regulator-to-regulator discussions and consistency in application that's going to be the most important. And so from an academic standpoint, watching how different states and organizations deal with a common problem in ways that are responsive to the unique space environment, we find that, I think, really interesting.
Thank you. Gabriel, you mentioned the track system. Can you tell us a little bit more about the system, and in particular, are there any key features that you can share with us at this point?
Sure. And we are in the Office of Space Commerce very much full speed ahead now with rolling out tracks. As you all know, this was tasked in SPD 3. It took a while for Congress to get us a budget to implement this, so we got a little bit of a slow start, but we are very much moving forward now, and I think this year is definitely a key year for us in terms of rolling out tracks. Tracks is going to have 3 components. It's called Tracks Oasis, which is the actual data repository. Tracks Skyline is application services, and we're also going to have, working with NASA, something called Tracks Horizon, which is a modeling, simulation, and research environment. So people can test future applications for how you might use space situational awareness data without actually, breaking the existing public-facing system. So that's going to be a really critical component. But just to dive in a little bit, we are tasked with providing a basic space situational awareness service. So the goal there, of course, is to provide safety data for the space community, but also not to compete with the private sector, and fingers crossed to actually support the development of a thriving SSA private sector. So that's a fine line to walk. And a bunch of work going on right now is figuring out what it means to provide that basic service, what counts as a basic service, and what would be more advanced services that we would not get into and private sector could provide. So we're receiving a lot of feedback from industry. We're having a lot of listening sessions talking about what exactly should our service look like. We are rolling out tracks in a very much an iterative process, or more specifically, we're actually following the agile development process. For those of you who are familiar with how software in Silicon Valley often rolls out, it's a sort of specific way of developing things, and it's sort of continuous improvement. So that's the goal for tracks. Phase 1, which we hope to we will release in October of this year, we'll be distributing tracks produced data to some beta users. And then over time, as that works, we will transition those beta users to the sort of normal product and increase the product over time. So we're going to be doing things like increasing the cadence of collision avoidance screenings from 3 times to 6 times a day, improving the presentation layer, and moving away from the existing system operated by DoD, where space situational awareness is shared on the basis of bilateral agreements. We're not going to be doing those sort of bilateral arrangements. We're going to have tracks open to the world And if anyone wants to use it, they can just click basically on our user agreement that we are in the process of working. All of this, as I keep saying, is continuous development, and we keep having listening sessions. We have another listening session in just a few weeks with industry. So, this is a conversation with industry, with, of course, DoD, which is behind much of the data, although we also will be ingesting commercial data. So if there's concerns that industry has or users beyond industry, particularly in the SSA community, but also those who operate large constellations, we have many, many touch points now and throughout the months that are on very technical things, like what does ephemeris data look like? And please don't ask me to explain that because it's super technical, but like literally like where do you put the numbers and how do you stick them in a field and how do the spreadsheets talk to each other? All the way up to those big picture questions like what are the services we provide? And we're working, of course, with the whole interagency. We're also working in the Commerce family. Thank goodness we have the National Institutes of Standards and Technology within Commerce, which has a bunch of experts who know all about things like data standards and how you share information around the world. So, when you say what are the features Trax is gonna have, it's gonna start out small and grow over time while trying to maintain that line of not getting into the business of private sector actors and not trying to sort of deter future advanced services that other providers might have. And the last thing I'll say on this one is that we do not expect, and we don't intend, and we don't need Trax to become some kind of global system. We recognize that other countries are going to want to have their own SSA systems. They have sovereign reasons for doing that, for not feeling like they have to rely on US data. And so we are spending a lot of time talking with the international community about what it could look like to have what we think of as a global federated system of SSA providers. And what we mean by that is multiple SSA providers, many of them sovereign, many of them commercial, all providing different levels of SSA services. But we are going to need to have some level of coordination or at least, let's say, like understanding, transparency among each other so that if a provider gets a message from one SSA provider that says, hey, there might be there's a potential conjunction, and another provider gives them different information, they need to be able to understand what those technical standards look like, get behind the data a little bit, and deconflict those things. So, if there's a phrase in terms of our global vision, I could suggest you take away it's this global federated system, multiple providers, all able to share information to the extent possible and be understandable to each other so that the users can figure out what that looks like. So more to come. That's what we're doing. If anyone has comments or thoughts on it, like I said, look for our industry listening sessions or many of the other forums we're reaching out to people. Thanks.
Thank you. That's really interesting. We look forward to hearing more and listening more. Charity, from NASA's perspective, what have been the most significant technological developments that have improved or have the potential to improve the ability of operators to minimize the creation of orbital debris?
Yeah, well, first I'm going to say that there is no one technical solution. In fact, it's not just a technology item that will develop a more sustainable space future. It'll be a combination of behaviors and technologies. But it was a technology question, so I will answer that. I look at it in two different ways, the mitigation piece and the remediation piece. And at NASA, of course, a lot of modeling tech development there, updating our models, debris analysis software, and other kind of supporting functions that feed into the mitigation and the decision-making for operators. But one thing, emerging technology that is needed and NASA's contributing to is something called the Starling experiment, ING 1.5. And so what this is, it's in collaboration with SpaceX, and it's a demonstration how to show two autonomous constellations and how they can cooperate with each other. And so that's a really important aspect of this, obviously, between, operational satellites, but with the congestion coming in orbits, especially low Earth orbit, it's important to understand how constellations will operate within each other, right, if they're two different operators. So that's an example of where NASA is contributing to the tech development on the mitigation side specifically. And I just want to give a nod to the commercial community and other government agencies for investing in other tech developments, especially on the remediation side. Very important to look at all of the above solutions and not just one single one.
Thank you. And Carl, continuing on the technology theme, is there any cutting edge technology in thinking about orbital debris mitigation in your opinion? What is that cutting edge? Active debris removal or carrier capacity?
Thank you again, Gabriel. It's great having a sidekick. Anyway, yeah, so, active debris removal, carrying capacity, this is kind of the thought framework, right? What are the things that are changing, that may change the thought framework? And so, yeah, definitely active debris removal is one, or remediation, depending. There's several different terms used to describe it, but basically removing, using one spacecraft or a process to remove another spacecraft to remove a spacecraft from orbit or an upper stage. That does seem to, obviously it offers some potential solutions for some of the challenges of the objects that are in orbit and will persist in orbit for a very long period unless some action is taken. It's one of the nice things that the FCC's ISAM proceeding may help to enable. The radio frequency aspects we would help to enable with an outcome there. And I think it's also, though, important to remember that a lot of the technologies and the processes are still in development, still being refined, and so on. And the level of experience with these kind of missions is relatively small. I think one of the things I'd look for maybe as an indicator of whether remediation or active debris removal has become a significant part of the landscape is if we start to see more spacecraft designed not just with the mission phase in mind, but also with the remediation, the potential for remediation, even if it's as a plan B if the primary plan for spacecraft disposal fails. So people designing from the beginning with the idea of being able to utilize remediation. We've seen some of that, the beginning of that with a couple of the companies that have developed attachment plates and things like that. But an overall design for the spacecraft where what happens at the end of mission is considered a little more systematically, maybe one of the indicators. The other thing you mentioned, carrying capacity. So I think that's widely discussed. I know in the work in the IADC that I've done, someone prepared a paper there, and I think it was probably 30 to 40 pages of equations, all with carrying capacity. It is widely discussed. It does go hand in hand with modeling of the space environment, and it can be really useful modeling to predict debris growth, also to potentially project what the effect on operations are going to be from particular deployment scenarios. But I would say that the assessments of carrying capacity, at least in a lot of the models that I see, are dependent on the current technical means for debris remediation. So, if active debris removal becomes a more common practice, or if there are improvements in space surveillance or improvements in coordination, the work that Gabriel's doing and so on, you can see then that they all play an important role in how you define the carrying capacity and provide solutions that really help to overcome some of the limits that might be implied in a particular carrying capacity model. So I think those are all kind of important. And again, I think it's one of the reasons why the work that OSC is doing and more generally the space surveillance and coordination work that companies are doing, NASA's doing, Those are all incredibly important.
Great, thanks. Did anyone have any follow-on comments to that question? Go ahead.
Well, I want to basically echo something that Carl said. First of all, carrying capacity is a dependent variable. It's not an independent variable. So it depends on lots of other things. And I think the regs themselves are also like that. Not only will the regulations for sustainability and orbital debris removal depend on technology, they'll depend on economics, they'll depend on the views of multiple stakeholders, not just one group or even one government. And it's also going to critically depend on how well the SSA or Space Domain Awareness Systems themselves work. If you don't know where anything is and you have to be conservative, then you're going to have really, really large error bubbles, and you're going to have big restrictions. If you know precisely where something is, then you can just really pack a lot more, into it. As someone's likened sort of SSA as like, playing ping pong in a dark room with a strobe light. Occasionally the strobe goes off and you say, oh, that's where it was, and then it goes off again, okay, that's where it was. To the extent that the SSA systems themselves become better, then I think you'll see regulations sort of evolve. Still, people are going to want to be sustainable and not have debris and accidents, but it is really very, very much a dependent function. So the kinds of things that Charity is talking about the autonomous constellations, I think that's obviously worth very close tracking by the Commission on RF interference, because not only is it an interesting sort of technical problem in itself with lots of equations, but it's very time dynamic. There's sort of a culture in traditional SSA, and I think I would say even in DoD, where you have an orbit and then something happens and the orbit moves and it settles and you figure out where it is. And then you do something and the orbit moves and you settle down and you find out where it is. Whereas the reality, for example, with like Starlink systems today, is they are already autonomously moving and changing a lot. And this is just a precursor for dynamic space operations that has both military and commercial implications. And so the days of static two-line elements coming out and taking a couple of days to get the track settled, that's largely gone. And I think the commercial industry is actually doing the community, oddly enough, a favor, not only by, producing these problems that we all get to deal with, but by the way they're sort of operating. They're providing a pilot program for dynamic space operations that I think really are the future and are not going to be the kind of the static processes that we've been used to in the past.
Did you want to comment? Chair?
I mean, I can jump in and just say very briefly on Scott's point. The Office of Space Commerce, we are partnering with industry to look at some of those autonomous tools to be able to bring those into tracks so that we can take into account that sort of rapid repositioning and autonomy. So I'll just say that we are indeed incorporating that into our work. And then the last thing I'll say about carrying capacity is that in addition to it being multi-factor dependent, it's also not a bright line, right? Space is about risk, and different types of operators may be willing to incur or tolerate different levels of risk. And one thing that I'm worried about is that some space industry models, their business cases, have relatively narrow margins or are sort of a little bit speculative. And one thing I worry about with regards to sustainability is if you get up against, I don't even really like the terms carrying capacity, but if you get into an increasingly risky space environment, either because it's more crowded or because you have less detailed information or for whatever reason, actors who are less able to tolerate high levels of risk may not be able to operate. But you could have other actors who might be able to tolerate higher levels of risk, either because they're bigger companies or because they're sovereign governments or national security actors. May be willing to operate there. So that does concern me, that you might have disproportionate impacts on, let's say, emerging commercial actors as you get up against those, particularly risky orbital environments. Thanks.
Thank you. Charity, what are NASA's research needs, or what areas do you feel more research is needed in space sustainability?
So NASA has a lot of leadership roles in research areas, and we'd like to infuse that externally to the agency as well. A couple examples. Well, we certainly want to reduce the uncertainties, as Scott was talking about, in orbit. If we can reduce those uncertainties, there's a lot more room for decision making. So as one item. Another item I'm starting to see more is the cislunar environment. I know we're talking about LEO GEO here, but there's not a lot of data for the cislunar SSA environment, understanding that. So I see that as a potential research area. Additionally, other items, for example, with the our ROSES research grant, MIT has a orbital capacity assessment tool out. It's open source. It's called MOCAT. And so, spreading those ideas out throughout the community and making them open source is potentially where we can find new revelations. And last but not least, I'm talking about technology research here. Let's not forget the economic research that's needed to look at the problem. And OTPS specifically looks at cost-benefit analysis of various remediation techniques and other items and activities in orbit too. So understanding a little better about the economics of all this will be important.
Thank you. Dr. Pace, do you have any views on how the government should be thinking about responsible growth, considering the projected scale and the number of companies and space stations?
I always get nervous if somebody says the government should have an opinion about responsible growth. It's like listening to government people having opinions about business plans. It's interesting, but should it really be dispositive? I mean, I think I have a very traditional, view about the role of regulation. The purpose is not to preclude or deter any commercial activity except for reasons of public safety or national security. It's not to do industrial policy. It's not to manage growth towards some target. It's really to serve public good, either for security or public safety. And I would be concerned about anything that limits people from trying something in the market, with all paying attention to not creating debris and destroying the very environment we want to operate in, of course. But I remember times before we had some of the remote sensing regs where it was just simply impossible for someone to be able to even have an attempt at being in the market. I remember when there weren't really ways for people to even to attempt to compete in some of the communication satellite markets. So I don't think the government should be there to shield companies from market and financial risk. It should make sure the regulations are supportive enough to give people a shot and see what they can do while protecting public safety and national security interests. And I think that is expandable and inclusive of sustainability of the very environment we want. The ITU has a phrase about wanting to have international allocations that are rational, efficient, and equitable. Pick 2 out of 3. But those things are in tension. But that, in fact, is what the ITU and the international discussions are about. And I think as we look toward futures here in regulating large constellations, that we're going to want to be, rational, efficient, and equitable. But we're going to argue about exactly what does that mean. I think that we will get to a point. Since you guys are in the front lines, you can laugh at this. But I think that just as was happened with GEO, where there were internationally agreed upon slots that were temporarily occupied, nobody owns them, but they were coordinated through an international process, that we'll have the same sort of thing happen with NGO systems. And we'll be talking about shells of systems and constellations operating within certain tolerances and for certain periods of time. And they have to have a certain amount of performance that they're responsible occupants, of those shells. And this is consistent with how really wireless regulation in general of spectrum has evolved over time. First there was wireless, then there were satellites, and then there were geoslots, and then there are going to be these NGO systems. And where each case we're sort of adapting, to that environment as we get out there. So the technical groundwork is being laid now, by the kinds of systems that Commerce is coming up, the kind of research that NASA is doing, and the kind of regulatory work that you guys are looking at. And as I said in the beginning, other countries are looking to us, not because they just want to adopt whatever it is we do, but we're kind of out on the pointy end, and we're struggling with issues that they know will come to them as well. And so events like today and transparency of it, I think, are really, really helpful and important. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to comment? Have any follow-up comments to that? No? Okay. Okay. All right.
Does anybody think NGSO shells are a good idea? Is there a better one? Dead silence?
Right. I don't know about that yet. So, okay. We have a few minutes left. So I'll just send it back to Gabriel. We've heard a little bit today about the whole of government approach to space sustainability, and you made some comments. You touched on mission authorization interagency in your opening remarks. If you wanted to add anything else, and if you could, you've talked a little bit about how the industry could also engage with OSC. If you wanted to make any additional comments there about how industry can engage with respect to long-term space sustainability.
Sure, and I'll work backwards, I guess, a little bit. In terms of best ways to engage, it kind of goes back to the three missions we have. The most formal way to engage, of course, is with our CRISRA division that does the actual regulating currently of remote sensing systems. Best way to engage with them, of course, is through the traditional notice and comment process. As I said at the beginning, watch the Federal Register. We're about to have a request for comment come out on whether we should fill a gap in terms of regulating sustainability of certain systems that don't get other licenses. So that formal process is the best way on the formal regs. In terms of listening to industry, listening to the community, you can always reach out to us. Obviously, we have a website. We're super active on social media, and you can, of course, schedule things with us. And on the track side, like I said, we have a whole raft of industry engagement, community engagement, and feel free to reach out if you can't figure out how to plug into that. But it is a huge part of their work is that engagement, because this is as I said, a sort of iterative growing process. In terms of the future of regulation and what some people have called mission authorization, it really is going to depend in large part on what Congress decides to do. Right now, none of the space regulators are explicitly tasked with taking sustainability into account. But we've all heard all day that it's super important. Industry agrees with that. I really don't like trying to paraphrase industry, but I think it's fair to say that. No one wants to, as I've said multiple times, operate in an unsafe environment. So if Congress decides to act, and if Congress grants some number of regulatory agencies the authority and requests that they take sustainability into account specifically, then it's going to be really important to work as an interagency to implement that. It's going to be really important to make sure, for example, that if there's multiple regulators, which should be avoided to the extent possible, there's not duplicative requirements. There's not even overlapping requirements to the extent possible. That we try to make whatever new system we have as streamlined and, I don't quite want to say one-stop shop, but as close to a one-stop shop as you can get for industry, taking into account the sort of reality of the way the U.S. regulatory system is currently structured. That's what industry wants. So we in the interagency are going to have to some extent, wait and see who gets what authorities if anything changes. But we will have our work cut out for us, making sure that we are able to deconflict our own operations, just like space actors need to deconflict theirs. In the meantime, while we wait for Congress, there's obviously more work to be done. We can always work better. We can do a lot of work behind the scenes to improve the interagency processes, and we all talk with each other all the time anyway. But I do think industry has a real and legitimate desire to make sure there's no black boxes whenever possible inside the U.S. government. And I really appreciate the transparency initiative the FCC has, because if there's one thing industry hates even more than risk, it's uncertainty, right? Not even knowing what the risk is. And so the more we can tell them who is involved in certain kinds of decisions, the more we can tell them what criteria government is using to make those decisions, the more they can put those kinds of factors into their own business plans and talk with investors and get insurance and all those sorts of things. So there's plenty of work for us to do now to make sure we can talk with each other, to explain our systems, to fill if there's gaps we can work to fill them. But then in the future, we ourselves need to react to whatever, if any, changes Congress decides to make and really make whatever the new system is as streamlined, non-overlapping, and transparent as we possibly can. Thanks.
Thank you. I see we're at time. Does anybody have any closing comments? If not, we'll wrap it up.
I'll just add to Gabriel's excellent points on whole of government approach for debris mitigation. One other thing I recommend is leveraging a common set of tools so we're measuring the same thing in the same way.
Thank you. That's really important.
Something Carl said earlier, the other regulators say as well, please, please, please don't wait till the end after you've got your technology done and your business plan ready to go. And the only thing standing in your way is those dang regulators in Washington. I mean, really, really think about some of this stuff up front and early. It doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of money or a lot of expense. Again, startups are limited, but really think about these issues before you come here. So I think that was wise advice from Carl.
I appreciate you mentioning that. Yes, CRISRA is very, very much open to talking with people. We've got our regulatory licensing down for remote sensing systems down to an average of 14 days, which I think is, I don't know if it's a record in the federal government, but pretty great. And we are always happy to do pre-license processes, talk with people, explain anything. I know other regulators are as well. So that is a really good point, I think, to even I don't know, end on, but to reiterate, is that talking early and often is helpful for everybody.
Great. Thank you. Carl?
Yeah, not much to add to that. I mean, obviously, the value of transparency, it's apparent across the agencies, and I think one of the reasons why this particular forum today, I think, is very important. So I just appreciate all of our colleagues being here. Yeah.
Great. Thanks again. Thanks for all of you coming in and joining us today. We're really happy to have you for this great discussion. I'll turn it over to Julie, who will close us out.
Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists and to our FCC staff. Thank you all both for being here in person and for being online. For those of you in the room, we will have a celebration of 20 years of orbital debris mitigation rules at the FCC with some cake and space-themed, we'll not name the brand, cookies. But we appreciate your ongoing commitment to orbital debris mitigation, and here's to the next 20 years. Thank you so, so much.